there has been no discernible genetic effect in the 2 generations of children of these bombing survivors. The media frequently turns to the Union of Concerned Scientists, a cleverly named group of neo-Luddites that represent a very small percentage, that's less than 1/10 of 1% of the scientific community. At UCS, politics drives science, not the other way around. Respectable scientists operate by considering a question, developing a methodology to answer that question, and then only then arriving at a conclusion. Respectable scientists disdain political interference and go to the media only when their conclusions warrant immediate public attention. The Union of Concerned Scientists stands this process on its head. It develops a press strategy first, and then conducts politically tainted and methodologically flawed analysis. That's why UCS partners with slick Washington PR firms and Ralph Nader to get attention, whether or not there's good science behind the sound bites. By any real scientific yardstick, the UCS has a lousy track record. Nuclear power scare stories occur in the media on average 200 times a year, in spite of the fact that there has never been a documented death to the public due to civilian nuclear power in the Western Hemisphere, period. Even with all the noise about Fukushima, the UN health scientists reported that no member of the Japanese public received a dangerous dose of radiation from the meltdowns. Fukushima is an object lesson in that if you allow stupid management behavior, bad things will happen. At Fukushima and in the U.S. energy industry up until 3 Mile Island, only the CEO was well paid. Everyone else was a C student from a C university. After 3 Mile Island, the nuclear culture changed. The U.S. nuclear industry today hires only the cream of students from top schools, trains them continuously, treats them and pays them like airline pilots, and now has an enviable culture and safety record. Radiation is a fact of everyday life. Radioactive elements have been an integral part of the human environment since the universe was created 15 billion years ago. Radiation is a natural component of the air we breathe, the earth we walk on, the homes we live in, the food we eat, and of our human tissue and bones. We are continuously exposed to cosmic radiation, particularly at higher elevations and during air travel. The average person in the U.S. is exposed to about 350 millirens a year, most of which, as you can see, is radon gas released from the Earth. Now, the scientifically accepted threshold for harm from radiation is 10 rems. Back to my hormesis slide. Now, that's 10,000 times 1 millirem. For comparison, a dental x-ray is typically about or less than 3 millirems. The maximum public exposure at 3 Mile Island was 4 millirems. And you know, that's the big noisy media radiation. 4 millirems was the maximum exposure. The residents of the Taiwan apartments are receiving annual doses of 7.4 rems. Not millirems, rems. Let me talk briefly about fear. Why is the public so irrationally fearful of radiation? Well, certainly the risk communication was influenced by the ideological coup of the linearity concept. Another explanation is the gross overcoverage of radiation stories by the media. The media is attracted to fear the way a moth is attracted to light. Fear becomes the story. Especially on TV, the media use inflammatory language such as deadly radiation or lethal radioactivity. Constantly hearing stories about radiation as a hazard gives people a subconscious impression that it's something to worry about. It's a what-if story. The news about nuclear is not about something that happened, but that it almost happened, or that it could happen. President Jimmy Carter was no friend of nuclear. He exacerbated our fears and personally killed the U.S. nuclear industry. To, quote, show that our heart is in the right place, unquote. He deferred indefinitely the reprocessing of commercial nuclear fuel in the U.S. to, quote, stop nuclear proliferation, unquote, except that it was a lie and had little impact on the international proliferation problem. It completely ruined the U.S. reactor export business and caused the U.S. to become the first nation to violate the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the most important safeguard the world has against proliferation. The world recognized that the Carter Initiative was phony, viewed it with contempt, and we lost credibility. But the media chose not to cover it. Have to remember that we had, back to our other slide, I don't know how to get this thing to go back, but remember coal is a lot of the energy that we use today is produced by coal. In his famous fireside address of 1977, President Jimmy Carter celebrated the nation's huge coal reserves and promised to double America's consumption from 500 million tons in 1976 to 1 billion tons by 1996. Today we use about 1.3 billion tons. Quote, this is Jimmy Carter. We were, after all, the Saudi Arabia of coal. There would be environmental problems, of course, but these would be solved by developing clean coal, unquote. Read my lips. Clean coal is an oxymoron. By any measure, the volume of pollution released by coal plants is staggering. Nationwide, coal plants account for 2/3 of all sulfur dioxide, the principal cause of acid rain, 22% of nitrogen oxides, the second leading cause of acid rain, and also of air pollution, 40% of carbon dioxide, and 1/3 of all mercury emissions. Coal power plants also release some 60 varieties of what the EPA terms hazardous air pollutants, including such known toxins as lead, 176,000 pounds a year, chromium, 161,000 pounds, arsenic, 100,000 pounds, and mercury, 96,000 pounds. That's just what goes into the air. Michigan ranks 10th in volume of mercury, emitting 2,250 pounds in the year 2010. Finally, there is uranium, thorium, and radium, radioactive wastes released from coal burning that serve as a source of radon gas. The impact of this radioactive radon gas from coal burning on the public's health far exceeds the effects of all the radioactive waste released from nuclear plants. There are currently 600 coal plants in the U.S., with more being built. Each year, coal plants produce 130 million tons of solid waste. That's 3 times all of the municipal garbage in the nation. Air pollution from coal causes 160 deaths per day. in yearly 60,000 ozone and 1 million asthma attacks and 1 million lost workdays. What makes coal cheap is that it does not have to pay the cost of its environmental impact. Now, reducing coal as an energy source, according to Lester R. Brown of the Earth Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., would significantly reduce medical costs from breathing coal pollutants. Brown estimates that coal-related deaths and diseases cost the U.S. up to $160 billion a year. I see that represents a lot of treasure. Getting close here. An important question is this: how did the EPA justify the decision to delist coal plants as a source of hazardous air pollutants? It simply overturned the conclusions of the nation's best scientists. Quote, "The EPA, in its expert judgment, concludes that utility emissions do not pose hazards to public health," unquote. That expert judgment was destroyed when it was revealed that the EPA Air Policy Chief, Jeffrey Homestead, lifted at least a dozen passages for the EPA policy statement from memos prepared by West Associates, an industry organization representing Western coal burners, where he formerly worked. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, or Congressional Watchdog Agency, blasted the EPA for cooking its books to allow net benefits to accrue to the coal industry worth $13 billion a year. I'll leave that up. That's the bib slide for this talk. The case for thorium power I have presented tonight is based on science. Well, the case for the opposition, i.e. the neo-Luddites, supported by a fear-mongering media, is based on political philosophy. When a nation whose welfare is highly dependent on technology makes vital technological decisions on the basis of political philosophy rather than on the basis of science, that nation is in mortal danger. Now, just before we start the video, I got one other thing, and this is about alternative energy, because you're always hearing about alternative energy. I didn't choose to retire to an alternative city, the city of Charlevoix. I'm not standing in an alternative library. I don't drink alternative water. Why would I settle for alternative energy when I can have in abundance the safest, the cleanest, the lowest cost energy that we know how to produce, thorium power? Let's look at some video.